international agency on energy, so I've written a lot of proposals, and we know that it's a difficult task to put everything together really concisely in a compelling way. So hopefully we can share some insights.
Hi, I'm John Dorgan from Michigan State University, but I was previously at the Colorado School of Mines for about 25 years or so. And I've been involved in the formation of two of the NNMIs, one being the IACME, which is the Composites Institute, which is also not only at the Colorado School of Mines, but at Michigan State University, and was involved early on with REMAID, and have been serving as a reviewer.
Thanks. So as I mentioned, we had prepared some questions beforehand, and I'll just ask the questions and let you go down the line talking about them. So what were some examples of highlights or bright spots that stood out to you in proposals from our first project call? Joe, you want to start?
Sure. I think there's a few pieces, and I think Magdi's introduction of this was quite good. Where we have the ability to sort of see graphically what's going on, and a tight narrative around sort of information that's conveyed. I think that's particularly important, especially when we can kind of describe where the current technology is, where competing technologies exist. I think that becomes a particular point. And so when we've seen that in proposals, I think that helps tell a particularly good and compelling story.
Yeah, so I think definitely from the proposals I read, the technology plan or the work plan was usually pretty strong. I also think the one of the other strengths in terms of the categories, in the proposal template was the team's qualifications and readiness. That generally seemed to be a good, that people were good at indicating that they, knew what they were doing in these categories in this topic area. So those were the strengths from my perspective.
Yeah, and I would just reinforce that what Magdi and Brian said earlier about having a nice, concise project summary. So even though we may have expertise in the area that we're reviewing, most reviewers have to have a sort of easily accessible project summary that says what you're doing, why it's important, how you'll do it, and how you'll know that you'll succeed if your project plan comes to fruition. And so having that sort of template, some proposals, not just here, but everywhere, the project summary is somewhat of an afterthought. It comes last, but I like the idea of thinking through that ahead of time and really putting an elevator pitch into that project summary so that the reviewer can get a 1 or 2 page overview of what it is that you're proposing and have a pretty good understanding of it before diving into the full proposal. So proposals that did that seem to be, it helped us do a better review.
Yeah, I mean, I was very excited by many of the proposals. I mean, there's a lot of great ideas out there, and there's a fantastic group of people that have come around together as part of the REMAID organization. So the proposal quality in general was very high. I'm a little bit of a stickler for details, so one of the things that will make a compelling proposal for me is when you have a very detailed work plan, and I think this goes to the SOPO. All of these proposals will ultimately be transferred into a SOPO. And so by having a detailed work plan in the proposal, you can see that this is something that's really going to work and that there are measurable outcomes associated with it. So I guess the ones that really were most compelling to me were the ones that really followed these ideas of the SOPO and actually showed us who was going to do what and exactly what it was that they were going to be doing.
Thanks. Are there any pitfalls you think teams need to avoid for future proposals? You talked about what you liked. What were some things that you saw people trip over?
Let somebody else start.
We're going to go back and forth.
Sure.
Okay. Well, for me, I mean, I think these NNMIs really are about, they're manufacturing initiatives. This is about engaging with industry in order to, do job creation and these types of things. So, it's you have to have a substantial industrial component. And to me that means there's cost sharing involved. So, a proposal where all of the cost sharing was just coming from a university is completely not compelling, I think, for this type of program.
I would say the balance, so in the project plan, all the teams had really strong, members. sometimes coming from different areas, sometimes coming from similar areas, but showing that, that each of the members is sort of strategically selected and how they'll work together is really important, because on its face, I mean, when you write a proposal, you know how your team will function. You know what expertise comes in at one point and how everyone will coordinate to execute the project plan, which, let's be honest, 1 to 2 years is a pretty short timeline for a lot of the goals that are put forward. So demonstrating that clearly was something that I saw as an opportunity for some proposals. Great staff, great qualifications, but how everything meshed vis-a-vis the project plan was sometimes not as clear as it could be. And the second aspect that relates to that is it's difficult to find that balance between having sufficient detail to prove to the reviewers that you know what you're doing and that you've thought out all the various aspects of your project, but balancing that with having enough high-level sort of simple messaging so that the reviewer could follow the narrative. So finding that balance between technical detail and high-level sort of summary to put into context what you're doing is also an area that I think most proposals that I saw did a good job of that, but it is definitely a pitfall. Each member writes their section, it comes together at the end somewhat hurriedly, those interconnected dots are sometimes missing, and maybe sometimes there is too much detail and not enough narrative tying everything together in a simple way.
Yeah. I think for me, pitfalls that I saw, I would echo John's statement about the cost share, but I would say I would broaden it out to make sure your budget makes sense for what you're doing, whether that it reflects that each partner is going to contribute in some way that makes sense for that partner and what they're doing, because it's an easy kind of red flag, I suppose, red flag, if you see in that budget that there's something that just doesn't go with what the work plan is. As a reviewer, you can see that for me, it was an easier way to identify that maybe this isn't quite ready yet for funding.
Can you give just maybe a little more detail? Is it the issue that people were listed but they didn't have enough time applied to it, or was it that they had too much time applied?
Yeah, or it was lopsided with one partner versus the other, or that as John mentioned, the cost share was coming all from kind of one entity that maybe wasn't the right entity to be doing cost share given the work plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's going to be unique to each proposal, so you have to work that out. But just it's an easy way to kind of send a flag up if you don't have that meshing with the work plan. I'd say another pitfall that I came across was also echoing Eric's statement. It's difficult to do, but saying enough about your technology that you demonstrate depth, but that you also you save the room for showing that it's commercializable. And I think there were some weaknesses in my scoring sheets anyway on tech transition plan or commercialization potential. Having at least a half a page or whatever is allotted to you to demonstrate or talk about why this is relevant to a broader audience, than just your company or your team. So.
And I think just to note, we've lengthened the tech transitions section, I think, on the exploratory proposals, just to give people a little more opportunity to explain themselves. So.
Yeah, and if you need to, talk to your industry partners or somebody about that as you're writing that part, because it's not, first I'm like, tech transition, well, there's an IP agreement, it's not quite just regurgitating that. It's talking more broadly about how the technology is going to, could make a difference more broadly in the industry.
Yeah, I want to echo this point. There's a sort of a tightrope that applicants need to walk to really demonstrate that there is not only the technical piece, but this commercialization potential. There's a business plan and thinking behind that, and that you can really demonstrate, describe the current state of the technology and what that future goal and target is with specificity. And that current state of the technology becomes important to describe and put into context. So the idea of having uniformity from the beginning sections to the end sections, that when any of us goes through the entire thing, that it doesn't look like something that's been cobbled together at the last moment. There really needs to have that sort of hard look and that time put into the whole piece. And I think one other thing for me that will jump out, and this may be reinforced from the perspective I have from the federal government, which is that any project really has to be contributing to the sort of the greater progress of the institute. This idea that, you know, these are pre-commercial technologies, that the project is not so specific just to the applicants. It really has to, you know, sort of walk that tightrope between, you know, a viable project that can make progress, of course, that's relevant to the companies that are, you know, to the partners that are involved, industry, academia, et cetera, but also really kind of contributes to that broader perspective. And that it can be difficult to do because, you know, especially when companies get involved, they have their own interest in mind. So how to do that and how to frame that well. And I think, you know, both can be done. A project can make progress towards the goals and targets that the performers want to have, that they're interested in. But that broader perspective has to be there. Because if it's not, you know, this may be too narrow, too specific, and may not have that broad impact.
Yeah, I just want to just jump in a little bit. I think this echoes something that both Joe and Meg said. You know, the polymers, and most of my expertise is in polymers and plastics, and so, you know, the idea of recycling plastic materials is not a new idea. And so, you know, there's symposia, special symposia that were held by like the American Chemical Society as early as, you know, the early 1970s. And so when I'm reading these proposals and, you know, all of the references are to papers that have been published in the last 5 years, that to me is a pitfall, right? It shows me that you don't really, you know, have an appreciation for the breadth of the technical data and literature that's out there. And so a lot of people are proposing things that have been done in the past, right? Simply because they're not well versed in the literature. And I mean, that's just a critical pitfall. You know, we just shouldn't be spending money to do things that have already been done in the past. And so, you know, a deeper appreciation of the literature when you're writing proposals is really critical.
I'm reminded, I had a colleague at Global Research down the hall from me, and he had on his door, you know, GE Global Research, where a year in the lab can save you an afternoon in the library. And of course, it was a little tongue-in-cheek, but, you know, you got to do a little bit of homework.
Yeah, and I would add something I forgot to that as far as pitfalls go. Be careful making overly ambitious statements too about what you think impact you think you can make, because I saw things where I'm like, oh yeah, I don't believe that. Like, and I just didn't buy it. So it's hard because you want to say this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but just don't say it. And you want to be quantitative, but if you are quantitative in a way that makes it absolutely like not believable, that's
Right. If you
for
can
reviewers. That's
if you can defend it, if you can defend it, that's good. I mean, the
Sure,
idea is
yeah.
to make progress,
Right.
but to see things that are hanging out there without, you
like
know,
a bold sweeping.
we're going
kind
to
of-
save 5 quads of energy in, you know, within 5 years. It's like that's, you know, there's no basis for that,
Right.
and where does that come from?
How can teams most clearly communicate the strength of their proposal team to reviewers? Some of you have touched on it a little bit, but what else might you add?
When I start down with this one.
Start in the middle, start in the middle.
Yeah.
So I'll take the first crack at that. I sort of got at this point somewhat with my earlier comment about you've got to show that the team makes sense, that the people have the right skills and so forth. You all know that because you're assembling your teams and you're choosing your partners in a way that's going to help you execute, you know, your grand vision. But it doesn't always come across that clearly in the proposal when sometimes it looks like it's written in piecemeal fashion and connecting those dots is an afterthought. So make that a central feature maybe. Make sure it gets into your project summary. You know, project summaries are short. You've got to choose your words carefully, but showing why this team is uniquely positioned to accomplish the big goals that you're going to accomplish. Make sure that that gets the same sort of visibility as the technical merit of your proposal, you know, the impacts and so forth, because I think it's a key goal of the Institute is you know, building partnerships that will have lasting impact and that are really world-class.
Yeah, I would just add, just to that, I think diversity on the project team, meaning that they're from different kind of perspectives, whether it's departments or kind of like disciplines or whatever you want to call it, that kind of interdisciplinarity can usually, to me, is usually more compelling than kind of like a single kind of discipline focus.
Yeah, I think what has impressed me, you know, across the board with the institutes is the quality, depth, and background of the people that are involved. So I don't think we have a problem with having great talent, but working together as teams, demonstrating how that team is going to work together. I think having interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary teams together is important, but it's not sufficient to just say, we've assembled a multidisciplinary team. How are those different experts going to come together to achieve progress? I think teasing that out, it doesn't have to be a lot of real estate in the narrative to do that, but making clear that that there is a team approach to solving this. There's no individual with these types of projects to make a truly sort of national and global scale impact. No individual is going to do this. These are going to be team projects.
Yeah, and I mean, for myself, I think the expertise in the team has to sort of reflect what's in the work plan. So what I mean by that is, say, if you're doing TRL, say, 2 to 4, it's perfectly fine to have all, scientific people on the as your team members. But if you're saying, well, we're going to start up a spin-off a company that's going to be involved in recycling, then you need people that have business expertise as part of your team. Similarly, if you're going to be conducting something like a marketing study, then you need somebody that has marketing expertise. So again, I think for a compelling proposal, if you really want it to be a home run, then you need to tie the work plan to the people that are as part of your team. And that gets all the way into the detail that was just discussed previously on the SOPO, right? You have tasks and they're assigned to specific people. Don't assign a business task to a chemical engineering college professor, right? It's just not the appropriate assignment.
Did you feel that there were specific sections of the proposal where teams fell short in achieving that mark? What were was there any one section that was the hardest, like where consistently you saw issues? Beyond what you said before.
I just glanced at my scores, and for me, the generally the lowest category tended to be the commercialization and transition, demonstrating that.
Yeah, I would echo that too. I think that's probably the area. I think we have a lot of people thinking about the science in the front end, but how to take that all the way to the end. And like I mentioned earlier, I think it's tough because you need to give a compelling picture, a compelling narrative for how this is going to be impactful, but be realistic about it. So I think the commercialization side is key, having the right people involved. And if you don't, I think you kind of need to go out there and find those people, or at least show how you're going to, that you're thinking about that. It can be an early TRL project, but you still can't just say, well, look, we're just early phase. We don't care about the downstream, because these really, the idea with these institutes is really to, make change. And so if you're going to make change, it's got to get out there in the market.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely sympathize with my fellow academicians that are out there saying, well, I have this great idea, it needs development. I'm not going to be able to go to an industry partner and say, let's do this because it's too far down the road. But one of the ways you can still tie that in is it's quite easy to get just letters of support. So rather than say, ideally you get, full-blown 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 cost share or something like that, that's fantastic, right? But that's difficult to achieve, especially when you're at low TRL levels. But still, if you're in contact with the industry, and most of us are, it's not that hard to get a letter that simply says, we've been in discussions with Professor Dorgan and we understand he's working on problem X. If he can, evolve until, goal Z and alpha are reached, then we would be interested in providing cost share. And to me, that's very compelling, right? Because it's saying that at least there is a path forwards to engage industry if you can meet certain, smart milestones, right? Things that are measurable. And so you can get them to easily put together a letter like that, and it shows the tie without really having to get the full-blown cost share commitment.
And there are other organizations too. I think, at the state level, there are state economic development agencies that are involved in technology development. Depends on the state that you're in, but I think doing that extra homework and going out and finding other partners, they might not be traditional, but at least what you're doing is you're getting out there. And what you will find is, it may not just be a source of maybe co-funding, but it's a source of expertise. Many of these, let's say, state technology development kind of organizations that do economic development have ties into industry. They have ties into how to develop a great business plan. So there are different elements that you can go and tap into, and just by doing that, it's not just checking a box and getting a letter, it's actually making fruitful and useful connections.
Before I turn it over to the audience, let me ask this question. A number of you come from academic backgrounds. How is writing a proposal for Remade different than what you might write for NSF or other funding agencies?
Well, the first answer for me is that you just have less space to talk about your science. There's just less space there to do that, and you want to go on and on, So you just have to really be concise on the scientific basis for what it is you're doing, because you don't have the room, and it's still a good thing to provide that basis. So for me, that's the biggest difference, but there's other things.
I think showing the real world relevance, not only to, well, the world, the big problems that the projects are trying to solve, but also to Remade itself. We can all learn from each other. There's a lot of data that could be generated in various projects. There are a lot of knowledge gaps on, when it comes to material cycles and how different technologies could fit in and what the impacts could be. So in many academic proposals, we try to show that we're coming up with, sort of we're forging new intellectual terrain, and that's always important. But here, I think one of the challenges is in showing that you're doing great work, but also that it helps meet the goals of Remade, it helps meet societal goals, helps meet national goals, and that sometimes takes a bit of a different perspective when you write a proposal that some academics, we don't always have to weave in so directly and in such short amount of space.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we strive to do when we're writing something to the National Science Foundation is to really look at like a discovery-based project. That is, there's a phenomena that's not really understood, and we're really saying, look, we have known facts that say this or that happens, and in some ways they seem to be conflicting, and we're trying to resolve that, right? I mean, there's a controversy there. What way does it really work? And so it's very deep and it's very fundamental, right? We're really trying to get at, we're trying to discover what's really going on. When you're doing work with industry, I mean, the idea, at least in my mind, is that, we sort of know how systems work, and it's a matter of getting the pieces together in order to achieve, a goal. And that goal, I think somebody previously mentioned the triple bottom line. I think in these types of endeavors, that's what we're really trying to do, is to advance the triple bottom line. And of course, part of that is that, you do have to have the first bottom line, the profitability. I've never run an NSF project that turned a profit.
And I'll just put in, I think most of my perspective might be a little bit different. I spent a lot of my career, running a small institute in electrotechnologies, and I would work closely with industry, and it was really important to be concise. And I would just maybe echo, to kind of turning it around, like what I would continuously ask myself is, the what, why, and how. What are you doing? What are we doing here that's impactful, and why can it make it, a difference? And how are we doing it? And if you can really, in the project summary, condense that down, the what, why, and how, and make a compelling case, bring in the context, I think you're almost halfway there. The rest of that, still needs to be well developed, right? Really getting into the details of how you're going to make progress. But that perspective, I think, keeping in mind of, conciseness, targeting your audience, and making sure that context is there so they understand the big picture, and then make sure you bring in the details later, I think is important.
So let's turn it over to the audience. If you've got questions, if you do, raise your hand, again, because we're videotaping this, so we'll get a microphone over to you. No questions?
We answered them all.
That's good.
Emily?
Sure. So, one, are you in need of more reviewers? And two, just from a logistical standpoint, if you had to put a guesstimate on how much time reviewers spend, what would you say it is?
Well, I didn't think the assignment was overly onerous, at least not by academic standards. I think I had something like on the order of 10 or so proposals to review. And I would spend, prior to the conversations, probably about an hour each or so, something like that, in terms of reading it, studying it, checking some of the references, those types of things. And then we came together and had a panel discussion. But at that point, there already was pretty good consensus. And so the panel conversations were, what, an hour, 90 minutes, something like that. So
Yeah.
I didn't think it was overly burdensome, but perhaps the people were kind to me and other people had to do more.
I would echo that, 1 to 2 hours per proposal, and then the panel review session, maybe 90 minutes, and some follow-up, not too onerous. And I think in general, it's better to have more reviewers. I think in my particular panel, we had just enough. It may have been good to have 1 or 2 more additional sets of eyes. But I think that overall, it was a pretty well-run process with the right experts in place, at least for the panel that I was involved in.
Any other thoughts? So Emily, just to answer your question, yeah, we are looking for reviewers. There was a note up earlier. I think if you're interested in being a reviewer, you can send me an email, and we'll be reaching out to a number of you. Again, industry reviewers, we're looking for reviewers from industry as well, because again, you bring a unique perspective to the table and can see some of those, how's this going to fit into the field. Other questions?
I mean, I think if you had sort of one sort of phrase that I would use, it would be, to under-promise and over-deliver. So, I mean, you can run into trouble if you say, well, at the end of this project, we're going to be recycling 5% more polyethylene than we do now. I mean, if it's a 6-month project, that's just, not credible, right? So you do want to have measurable outcomes, but you don't want to be, claiming the moon and the stars over a $500,000 2-year project. I mean, it's hard to move the needle much with that type of effort, right?
So maybe just one final question for the panel. If you could boil down your advice to the one thing that is most important to think about.
Oh, I guess I just jumped the gun then. 'Cause I think I
Yeah.
just said.
If the rest of you could take John's perfect example and give one final thing.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say cohesiveness and clarity in the project proposal is always a good, rule of thumb. And the proposals that I read that did that had a better chance of me actually, knowing how to better review it than others. So you can help the review process by being very clear and connecting dots. You might think it's obvious because you've been working on it for a month, but not often. I mean, oftentimes a reviewer will pick it up and not come at it with the same background. So a lot of hand-holding would be good. The other plea I'll put in is I'm someone who works on analysis, and having good data is really an important aspect of doing good analytical and modeling work. And when it comes to these grand challenges that Remade is trying to solve, there's a humongous lack of data when it comes to understanding material cycles and recycling opportunities and technologies and their costs and their applicable markets and so forth. So proposals that, the proposals are all doing really groundbreaking work, but proposals that also included some let's say, knowledge sharing, whether it's data sets, whether it's insights, whether it's progress updates that could be fed into the overall Remade process, in my eyes were really great, because not only would you produce something that's hopefully going to have large impact, but along the way others can learn about what you're doing and maybe have data to make better decisions or better understand the challenges faced or the opportunities created through other technologies similar to yours.
Let me just jump on that just as I think one of the great things with Remade, having this analysis node, if you're in, one of the technology development nodes, how are you thinking, have you contacted, the folks with the analysis node to see where the data, gaps are, how this may contribute, and you may see, again, you're sort of expanding out that team to drive to an overall greater project. I think, thinking about this is key, and it's a really good point, Eric.
If I had to boil it down, I'd say the one thing that I want to see is a compelling story, and that means that there should be an explanation of the size of the problem. That there are a lot of big problems in this area, so that should be easy, right? So the size of the problem, and then this innovative piece that's also grounded that it's not already been done before, right? That you're adding. So that connection there, like big problem, we have the solution that's innovative. To me, that's the